Good afternoon, Year 10. Nice to see you all. I hope you're all staying safe and hope you're all well. Um, in today's lesson, we are looking at Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth. And before we start, I'm going to ask you to pause the video to brainstorm what you can remember about the play so far. That can be in the form of a mind map or in bullet points. Take at least 10 minutes to do so. I'd even recommend, if you have time, to reread Act 1, Scene 3, just to jog your memory and familiarise yourself with where we are up to in the play. So I'll see you shortly. Please pause the video. Okay, so at the beginning of the scene, we're in an unfamiliar location. We're in Forres, the palace, the royal palace of King Duncan, the King of Scotland. And we have in the stage directions Duncan, but with his son Malcolm, his other son Donalbain, and some lords and attendants. And we get, from the beginning of the scene, we get essentially a, a, a bit of an introduction to Duncan as a character. We learn a little bit about his style of leadership, a little bit about his personality as well. Duncan first asks at the beginning of the scene, has Cawdor been executed? Have those who are told to do it come back? And Malcolm says, yes, they did. He confessed his treason, which is important, and he actually died in a fairly dignified and noble fashion. And I saw it myself, essentially. And then the interesting part, which is a kind of a philosophical musing that Duncan makes when told about the Thane of Cawdor's death and thinking and considering his relationship with the Thane of Cawdor. He says, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. And he's speaking metaphorically. He was a gentleman on whom I built absolute trust. This is actually an example we haven't really talked about this term so far. I would say this is an example of dramatic irony. And I'll tell you why in a second. But dramatic irony is when the audience is aware of something or has knowledge of something that the characters on stage do not have. And in this case, we are aware of something that the character of Duncan is unaware of. He's talking about the Thane of Cawdor, and he says there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. Essentially, he's saying metaphorically, you can't tell what someone is thinking, what kind of character they really are by reading the face. Essentially, he's saying that looks and appearances are deceiving. So I'll put that in my notes. Appearances are. And of course, that's ironic because we've already seen an example of appearances being deceiving earlier in the play with the witch's prophecies. And he says, he was a gentleman in whom I built absolute trust. And the reason it's dramatic irony here is because Macbeth is about to enter, and Macbeth is another man who Duncan has absolute trust in, and again, he shouldn't do because Macbeth will soon have murderous intentions, and we know that Macbeth is already pondering regicide. So it's an example of dramatic irony for that reason. We know that Macbeth is another face that Duncan should not trust. He goes on, he was a gentleman whom I built absolute trust. And I think this is the first indication of, you could possibly argue that Duncan is not the great leader that we may think he is, because he seems to have poor judgment. He seems to trust in the wrong people, perhaps. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. Then we have the entrance of Macbeth, Banquo, Ross, and Angus, and we have this, essentially the flowery and metaphorical language from Duncan. Basically, in the next part of the play, in the scene, he's expressing his gratitude and his debt to Macbeth. He says, you've done more for me than I can pay you. So you've done so much for me that I can never pay you back. And he's aware that he's indebted to Macbeth, and that he's a noble subject. And Macbeth responds by saying, what I've done is what my duty is. And it's important that he repeats the phrase, our duties. And he even reminds himself of what his duties are. He says, our duties are to your throne and state children and servants. And there's an irony here as well, because we know that he has ulterior motives at this point. So actually, he's not going to be fulfilling his duties later on. Okay. We then have more metaphorical language here. Duncan welcomes them. He says, I have begun to plant thee and will labour to make thee full of growing. And there's this kind of image of almost a maternal nature in Duncan. Duncan is going to plant them like seeds and make sure that he nurtures them and sees that they grow fully. So he creates this image of being almost a god, almost a maternal figure, someone who is the protector of his people, someone who is good to his loyal friends, who rewards them and who makes sure that they get their rewards that they deserve. And Banquo plays with that language as well. I am going quite quickly through this because there's a very important moment coming up. We then have Duncan assembling the people, assembling his lords, his sons, his kinsmen, his thanes, and he makes an announcement. And the announcement is going to, again, we've already had one prophecy that has been an inciting moment. This is another event that serves as an inciting moment to push the plot of the play forward, and he names his successor. Okay, he says, "We'll establish our estate," and he's speaking presumably in the royal we. We will establish our estate upon our eldest Malcolm, and he says, he'll be noble. The stars will shine on him, and then he says, we're going to go to Inverness, which is where Macbeth lives, and we're going to have a feast essentially. So I'll put the word feast. But importantly, he has named Malcolm as his successor, not Macbeth. Remember, I told you that the clans in Scotland had a meritocratic hereditary system. So it wasn't the case that you would just pass the throne to your son necessarily. You could have passed it to someone who deserves it. And Macbeth will feel aggrieved and feel bitter that he's been overlooked. That's the most important thing to take away from this. Macbeth has been overlooked. He feels as if he hasn't been justly rewarded for his efforts in the battle at the beginning of the play. And he hides his bitterness here. He's pretending that he's not angry and he's not enraged. And he says, this is what the rest is labour. I'll be a messenger, and I'll go and tell my wife of your approach, that you're coming to it's an honour. You're coming to my house in Inverness. I'm going to leave you humbly now. And he says again, worthy, and that comes up a lot, worthy Cawdor. And then we have this brilliant aside. And again, remember that the aside is when he's on stage with the other characters, but he's now submerged in his own thoughts. And notice by now how many times this happens to Macbeth throughout the play. He will spend large parts of the play exploring the depths of his own imagination. And he says that the Prince of Cumberland, that's Malcolm, that is a step on which I must fall down, or else o'erleap, for in my way it lies. And again, it's a metaphor, and Shakespeare's the king of the metaphors. He's talking about how Malcolm is an obstacle in his way, and it'll either be my undoing, I'll either fall down, or I'll have to overleap it. So he's either going to have to not scale this wall, or he's going to have to jump over it. Then he talks directly to the heavens and to God, presumably. Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand. And we've got lots of references. Students sometimes find this part a bit tricky. He directs his speech to the stars metaphorically. He personifies them. Perhaps he's referring to the heavens, but he's certainly referring to lots of light imagery in this scene. And actually, well, really, I should have said dark imagery to do with darkness, actually. So we've got stars, hide your fires, put out your fires. So he wants the light to be extinguished. Hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires. So we've got lots of juxtaposition between light and dark. And actually what Macbeth is asking for or requesting is darkness. He doesn't want there to be any light. And that might include, going back to the stars, that might also include the light of God. He doesn't want to have the light of God shining on him. He wants to have the darkness of the devil. Why does he want darkness? Because he's been consumed by evil, perhaps. On a more practical and literal level, because he requires darkness to perform the murder, is perhaps the other reason. And he kind of extends this metaphor by saying the eye wink at the hand. The eye being maybe the idea of him deceiving Duncan and going back to the idea of the face's construction. But the fact that it's winking at the hand, we call this this is kind of an example of synecdoche, which is when you use one word to describe something that's actually bigger than that. So, for example, you might say nice wheels about a car. It's like a way of describing something else. When he talks about the hand, he actually means, in fact, it's a bit like saying the crown for the monarchy. What he means by the hand is the almost the murder weapon, because the hand is going to clutch the dagger, which is going to do the killing. So the hand is the agent, the assassin, as it were. But he's also asking, if the eye is winking, there's again a sense of darkness and being blinded. Again, this idea of needing and requiring darkness comes up again. Yet let that be which is the eye fears when it is done to see. And he's again talking about how he might fear the sight of murder, but he needs to see it nonetheless. Duncan accepts his excuse about being a messenger and snaps him back out of his really dark and murderous thoughts, and essentially sends them off. He describes Banquo and Macbeth as being valiant and brave, and then the last lines are, "Go and bid us welcome in your castle. It is a peerless kinsman." So he's talking about Macbeth, and he's saying he is a kin of mine without any peers. He's essentially the exceptional and unique kinsman that I have. And then there's a flourish, and they exit, and they're on their way to Inverness Castle, which is it's actually called Dunsinane, the castle where Macbeth and his wife live. And we've come to the end of the act. But I would say definitely the most significant part of that scene is the stars hide your fires aside. Hugely significant. Okay, so we've come to the end of another lesson. We're still on Act 1. We've got a while to go on Act 1. Please make sure you now take time to complete the independent tasks I've set you alongside the quizzes. I haven't mentioned this for a while, so I'm just going to mention it now. It's a really good idea to make sure you review your notes after each lesson, that you review your notes before the start of each lesson, and that you use these videos wisely. So you've got an opportunity with the video format to rewind, to pause, to go over and watch again certain sections of the video. So if anything has kind of gone over your head, or if you're not clear on anything, then please do go over that part of the video again. Okay, so I'll see you next time, Year 10, for Act 1, Scene 5, where we finally meet Lady Macbeth. See you soon.